All right, how many times have you caught me saying this? If the markets are worried about a trade war or a Supreme Court pick who might get picked apart to the point that he doesn't make it to the Supreme Court, they have a funny way of showing it. We're at around session highs right now. Virtually all the Dow stocks, save Verizon, McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, and DuPont, are participating in this rally. So you got to wonder, what's that all about? Maybe just they think all of these ill winds blow, including the Cavuto situation and, of course, with the trade situation that seems to escalate, but maybe not. Let's get the read from the National Taxpayers Union senior fellow, Mattie Duppler. Mattie, what's going on here? It doesn't jibe with what you see happening, but the markets are dismissing this for the time being.
Yeah. Yeah, hey, Neil, I mean, this is the conversation we've been having for how many months now, which is every time we see negative trade action coming out of the White House, the markets kind of seem to shrug. And there's a couple different theories out there. You know, one of the things about the market, though, is that it really does generate confidence, right? If the market's doing well, Americans feel like they're doing well. So really what I'm thinking about is less about the market today and more about 6 weeks from today, and that's when the midterms happen. You know, right now I'm very concerned about the fact that the administration is arguing that we should have more tariffs at the border, which is what, more taxes at the border, I should say, which is what tariffs are on American consumers a couple weeks out from an election, when what I would like to see is all Americans going to the polls to vote on the fact that they are better off now than they were a year ago. And that's objectively true based on Trump's economic agenda on deregulation, on tax reform. We know that Americans are better off now. Families are doing better. Businesses are able to invest here. But the trade war does increase uncertainty in the economy. And as we've seen, that creates volatility in the market, which can have an effect on consumer enthusiasm. Ultimately, in November, I hope that does not have an effect on voter enthusiasm.
That's very well put. You know, Mattie, I always tell people over the many, many years I've been doing this, too many years, by the way, is that markets don't ignore news. They're very cognizant of everything that's going on. They just choose to focus on what worries them and what doesn't. And if all of these developments, including the Cavuto situation, isn't worrying them, and a lot of people might say, well, how would the markets fret about Cavuto anyway? He's a conservative justice. This is a largely conservative crowd. He's a pro-business judge at that, and they like that on the court. So you can make the argument that it's in their interest to get someone of that ilk on the Supreme Court. I'm not making a blanket political statement, but I guess I am. So if it looks...
Neil, it's your show. You're allowed to do that.
Exactly. That's what I say. But what I'm saying here is that they're not worried that that's going to happen. Now, on the Cavuto situation right now, you could make just the opposite argument that it is looking dicey for him. What are your thoughts on this and where this is all going, especially with the Monday hearing and all of that?
Well, listen, I think that you look at the Supreme Court, and it's a little bit of a fool's errand to argue that one justice can augur what the Supreme Court will rule. I mean, look at John Roberts, conservative elected to the Supreme Court, effectively the guy who held up Obamacare. So, you know, there's a lot of question. I think if you're a conservative and you're looking at the court, you're looking for someone with very, I guess, consistent jurisprudence, so you can at least contemplate what philosophy they'll have when looking at some of these cases. But ultimately, that hasn't been a good predictor of whether or not a decision in specific cases has affected, has been a conservative viewpoint.
Not to be rude, but let's take the extreme case. I can't imagine it, but it could happen, where his nomination explodes for whatever reason. Then Republicans, we're told, would hope to try to get a replacement in there. Time would be of the essence, obviously. Then they lose the Senate in the midterms. All of this is a series of domino events would have to fall, just like that for Democrats. And then we could conceivably have quite a long period of time, a year or more, of an 8-justice Supreme Court. How likely is that in your eyes, or are we just giving the worst-case scenario that is an unlikely scenario?
Yeah, I don't see that being the outcome if the Cavuto nomination ends up being delayed in any way. I think if the Cavuto nomination does not happen, or excuse me, if he does not get onto the court before the midterms, I think what that does is that really edifies most Americans' opinions of Washington, which is that we can't get anything done here. So really what that has is an impact. In that situation, a Republican, regardless of what happens in the midterms, let's say the Senate were to switch, Republicans would rush through his nomination in that Now,
interim,
Neil, here's the thing, Neil. I think that what that does, like I said, that really does codify what most Americans think about Washington, which is that nothing gets done here. And that's bad news for Democrats. I mean, you've got 10 Democrats running in states where Trump won. So those Democrats then are going to have to go home and try to explain to their voters why they deserve to stay in Washington when voters are upset that we can't even get what is a basic, conservative, pretty unobjectionable guy on the Supreme Court. If they can't even do that most basic function of government, Democrats are going to have a hard time explaining to their voters back in their states why they deserve to stay in Washington, D.C. So I think that it makes it even less likely. Right now, I don't think it's very likely at all, but it's even less likely that Democrats will take back the Senate, and therefore there will still be a lot of runway to get someone nominated to the Supreme Court who is a conservative jurist and who will serve the interests of taxpayers.
Yeah, a lot of chips have to fall exactly a certain way. Mattie Duppler, great seeing you again. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get a couple of updates on what is happening here. We're going to go to the White House shortly. We're going to be getting one of those proverbial pool sprays where the president is with the Polish leader. But